For New Zealand, I don't think they should open it up just because we've got enough talent here to sustain, the longevity of I guess the legacy of the All Blacks jersey being forever strong, and we've got great development here. But at the same time, I think for other countries, I can see the viability in it, and choosing overseas players who are based abroad, or who may be in France or England playing on a contract over there, and I can also see the feasibility of having those players available when maybe a northern tour of those places are done.
Mm,
You
mm.
know, because
Injury cover, yeah.
injuries can happen, and I know I've seen it happen time and time again with the sevens form, where New Zealand sevens teams have gone over to that part of the world and played sevens tournaments, and they've called upon guys who've been on contract over there. Like for instance, when they did the same thing with Mana Ashford, they brought him in. He did
Huh?
an amazing step and won the bloody game for them. It was the
I think I
final.
remember that. Yeah, I think I watched that. Yeah.
He did a step from a penalty, and he won the game. And there was kind of
There was a
like,
jumping one too.
yeah, there was a jumping one.
There
There was a jumping one that didn't wreck his knee.
Well, I guess the thing is with that though, with they do open it up and start choosing players from overseas, I can understand the pros with it, but the cons would be your young
Yeah,
aspiring All Black in
yeah,
New Zealand looking at that and saying, well, what's the point of sticking around if they're going
yeah,
to continue to choose players? Because
yeah.
you think your opportunity might come now that some of the more seasoned All Blacks move on and go overseas, and then, okay, it opens a door. There's Frizell going, this opens a door. Moanga's going, it opens a door for the next one to step in, or the understudy to stake their claim. But then now, if they're going to, so will there be restrictions? Because if players go overseas and still get selected, the money's going to lure. They're eating their cake, having their cake and eating it too. Get the big contract overseas, but I can
Hmm.
still play for the All Blacks, or do I sacrifice the potential earning overseas, but stay for the appeal of the jersey? And so there's what's the guarantees for a younger person sticking around then? Why
Yep.
stick around when I'm not going to get selected because people are going to still get selected from overseas? Well, that's always been tradition, but who knows? We'll never experience it unless we do experience it. Australia have tried it. Gateau was a well-known story about him playing abroad, and they brought him in for his last World Cup. And they're experiencing it now with Will Skelton and even guys just being selected whilst playing abroad. Has it been the most successful formula for them to date? I don't think so. But, you know,
Yeah. I'd hate to see what Super Rugby looks like, because this is probably the most boringest year of Super Rugby that I can think of this
oh,
year
are you saying
compared
that
to
because your
previous.
team was mediocre?
No,
Or
I'm not saying that. I'm
oh,
saying that because this was the least amount of games I've ever watched. I've normally watched a lot of games, but I only watched all the Blues games, and I found myself watching more NRL than Super Rugby, which is part of the reason why we haven't kept the podcast going. I couldn't comment on a lot of the games, and I just felt that there was too many blowouts, there was too many predictable scores and predictable wins, and if you exacerbate that by taking all the top players out because they're taking the money and knowing they're going to get in the All Blacks, like what would Super Rugby look like? But I think we're reaching a critical juncture because players that went overseas, they wouldn't be good enough to get in the All Blacks anymore. So even if they opened it up, I would struggle to think prior how many guys from overseas we would take as say you're better than the local guys. But I
but I
think we're
think
reaching that juncture now because Moonga's going to be overseas. I think Barrett's going overseas. Frizell we talked about. These are guys who would still be potentially the best in their position who are New Zealanders. And
But that's
that's where we're
but
reaching
it
that
opens
juncture,
up.
which
So
we
you
haven't
go
reached
back
before.
to Luke McAllister leaving at an early age. You
But
know,
we will
you
find we had whoever else was
yeah,
next in
yep,
line was
that's
better.
just true. But then, given the option, you'll have a more of an exodus where players will then choose that option of going because I still have a chance of being selected, even if I'm an incumbent now and I'm at the peak of my powers now. So if those rulings were in place, I believe a Charlie Piotr would still get selected from abroad because he was still one of our best outside backs at the time he left.
I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced.
Ooh.
Because he didn't get picked in the World Cup squad for as good as he was. And this is sort of an issue
that came about those days. That came about was because he was already signed. That was the controversy. He was already signed to go abroad, and so they didn't bother honouring his. And there was obviously there was more of a backstory to it that at the time it was leaked. But it's different now. You see guys like Fainga'anuku, he's going abroad, and yet he's still being included in this World Cup squad.
But that comes back to the coach being sacked beforehand. So Foster's already on the way out, so he's not looking about the future of New Zealand rugby. He doesn't care. So he picks Frizell over Akira. He'll pick Leicester over whoever.
To make a point,
before, if
flip the bird at New Zealand Rugby Union so that they can win it.
But if he felt that he was still going to be part of New Zealand rugby, then that's where if it's a close call, they'll pick the guy who's staying loyal to New Zealand. Which
but I think Foster's in an interesting predicament because
he doesn't matter what he does, he's out.
That's right. He's out no matter what. So he's not looking for the future. He's looking for a result that will send him off into the sunset. He's looking for the best team, regardless of they're going off contract at the end of the year, because he wants his final legacy. He wants to at least have a Rugby World Cup win under his coaching stats, despite a poor record as a coach. But if he leaves, you look at Stephen Donald, look at the turnaround that we had of him as a player. A year before he was the villain of a test in Japan or Hong Kong when they lost to Australia. But then he comes back from whitebaiting, and now he's a legend in the folklore of All Black history because of his feats at a World Cup final.
Right. Yeah, interesting thoughts. It'll be interesting what they do because this is, like I said before, I think we've reached that critical juncture where there's going to be New Zealanders overseas who are better than the New Zealanders who stay. And we haven't got to that point before, I don't think. So you talk about Luke McAllister, when he left in 2007 after 2007 World Cup, Martin Nonu became the All Black starting second five 2008. That's fine. Go McAllister. This guy's just.
Oh no, I'm not trying to compare. The player ability or the caliber of players. What I'm trying to say is that players will have a viable option to choose, regardless of whether they're an incumbent or whether they're a fringe player, to go overseas. So we lose all of this talent abroad, and then we either have to make do with selecting what we have left or choose from those that are. If that becomes the relaxing of those regulations, I believe we'll see more players leave because now they can still have their eligibility on their side, whether they play here or there.
Right. My point is that I think we're starting to reach that point. So this is where Australia got to before, where they had better players playing overseas than they had locally. And that's where they started to relax the rules a bit. South Africa got to that same point as well, where Andre Pollard and all those other guys, Chesley Colby, playing overseas, and the overseas guys were better than the locals. And I think we're reaching that point because Mo'unga will be better than, I don't know who's whoever's left. Beuden Barrett is gone. That's guns, first fives. Yeah, if Mackenzie's, God forbid, something happens, I'm assuming he's staying. The cupboard's pretty bare after that.